Hey, everybody, this is Chris
and Kathy
from PetAbility Podcast. We wanted to take a minute to thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate every listener and are grateful for this platform.
Please help us share our vision by subscribing to PetAbility Podcast through your favorite streaming app. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at PetAbility Podcast and share our content on social media.
You can also support the show by making a donation. Simply go to our website at petabilitypodcast.buzzsprout.com and click on the heart symbol at the top of the page. Thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to PetAbility. I'm your host, Kathy Simons.
And I'm your host, Chris Cranston. Our podcast provides interviews and information to help your pets live their best lives.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic. I have been so pumped all week since we found out that this guest has agreed to talk to us. So I'm just jazzed.
I am so pumped too, Chris. Let me tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I came home and my email inbox was blowing up. It must have been 20 or so people, different people saying, you've got to watch this video, Kathy. You've got to see this, right? And I click on the video and it is a video of a woman who is doing fish rescue, and she's rescued a disabled goldfish. And so now I'm 100% in, right? I'm 100% buy-in because it's just this little baby goldfish. And it's having some difficulty with buoyancy. So floating to the top of the tank, so he's staying at the bottom of the tank. And the woman, whose name is Gwendolyn Church, who's our guest today, talks about how she helped him, to not only to maybe get up to the top of the tank, but also with his environmental enrichment and so many other things. And I was just blown away by a couple of things. One, they took him to the vet and they x-rayed him, which, my background in radiology is just like, wow, I didn't even know you could do that. I had no idea you could x-ray a fish. There must be so much involved with that. But the other thing that blew me away was just watching Gwendolyn with so much care and compassion and empathy for this little tiny life, right, that she had rescued. And then it turns out that this little fish, whose name is Benjamin, he did end up passing away. But I will tell you what, I hard cried when it happened. I'm sobbing because I'm 100% buy-in with Benjamin, but I'm also 100% in with Gwendolyn and just her passion for saving these little guys and how much empathy she had for him and how much compassion she had for these little guys. So I said, we have to talk to Gwendolyn. And in particular, I think that it's really, want to talk to her about the possibility that there may be some misconceptions about fish and owning fish, that maybe they're an easy pet to have, or maybe they don't have or need so much environmental enrichment, but they're just like any other pet. They totally need all that. They need their physical environment, their tanks, their heaters, their lights, whatever they need, and they need to have this environmental enrichment. So I thought that was really important to go over. And I'll tell you a little story, Chris. I don't think you know this, but I had a fish not that long ago, probably 2007, 2008. And I did the same thing Gwendolyn did. I went in, I found this little betta fish in a little cup in one of these little pet stores, and it wasn't a good color. It was almost like a pink color, right? And I bought him for like $3 and I brought him home, and his name was Swimmy, right? And Swimmy had a lot of problems, but I'll tell you what, he started thriving when we gave him the right environment and the right type of food and the right, temperatures and stuff like that. And we had Swimmy for a good 2 years after that. And I had no idea how old Swimmy was, but I'll tell you what, it was a great 2 years. It was a fantastic little beta. I had no idea they had that much personality, and I adored him. So that's my little fish introduction, Chris.
There you go. Well, let's get to it. Let's introduce Gwendolyn. Welcome.
Welcome, Gwendolyn. It's great to have you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited.
We are too. We were just blown away by that video that we saw. I want to say, I'm sorry, Gwendolyn, what was it on the forum?
It's on GeoBeats Animals. They do those kind of animal videos, the feel good, cute ones, and they do a fabulous job with the editing and the display of everything. I just talked with them, and then they put together the whole wonderful video.
They did a great job with that video. I agree. It was very moving, and your passion for these fish really, for the fish that you rescue, really came through in that video. So maybe you could get started with telling us how all of this began for you. How did you become interested in rescuing fish, and how did you start the Friends of Philip Fish Sanctuary?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a little bit of a long backstory, I think. So I am vegan, and I've volunteered at a farmed animal sanctuary for a few years. And, I think most of us who love animals, we want to, we kind of fantasize about, like, I want to have my own sanctuary or my own rescue operation or something like that someday. And I certainly have this affinity with farmed animals, but I don't have the huge space that something like a farmed animal sanctuary would need. But I had come across a story on the website Reddit of someone who was able to go into one of these large chain pet stores, and they found, just like you said, one of those Bettas in those terrible little cups on the shelves. And the fish was doing so poorly that the store allowed this person to adopt them and take them home for free. And so, I don't have acres for cows or something like that, but I do have space for an aquarium. And at the time, I definitely wasn't intending to have it become a full-scale anything. I was just thinking of providing a good home for one little fish. And so I went to the pet store to look at, like, the equipment and how much money I was going to be spending to get into an aquarium or something like that. And I had the idea to buy the tank and set it up and have it just kind of ready. And instead, I went to the store, and the first store that I went to, I stopped and I looked at the Bettas, and there was one little fish in the back who was just pale and underweight. And at the time, I didn't really know a whole lot about fish, but it was apparent even to me that he was for sure going to die if he stayed on the shelf there. He had horrible fin rot and just was really not doing well. So I asked the manager at the store if I could take him home as an adoption, and they let me. So I walked out of the store with the little fish, and that was Philip. And that's, like, kind of the motivation for everything. So it started with him and that one tank, and quickly grew.
Yeah. First of all, I love that you named him Philip. That's that's a really good fish name. And, when I had Swimmy, I'll tell you, the same thing happened to me. I went into the store and I found this little fish in a cup in the way back, and he wasn't the right color. He was not looking very good. And immediately I was like, that's the one. And I want to take that one home. But it was so worth it. And I love that that you talk about having a sanctuary. You're right. We all fantasize one day I'm going to have a dog sanctuary or a cat sanctuary. Maybe no one thinks about it for fish, right? Maybe no one thinks about it, but they're just as worthy of rescue as any other animal, right?
Yes, yeah, and they really, really are. And in terms of scale, the aquatic animals and fish in particular are by far the most in need, kind of in every category. Like, they're the most numerous pet animal, period.
Wow.
And if you're looking at, like, where you can make the biggest impact, trying to educate people on appropriate care for fishes and how to really make them a member of the family instead of something like a decoration, is such a huge way to be able to help those guys.
So, Gwendolyn, tell us a little bit about, what proper fish care entails. And I'm sure it varies depending on the species and so forth. But, what is some typical fish husbandry that people need to be aware of when they're thinking of bringing a pet fish into their home?
That's a really, really good question. And like, if someone just asks themselves that question before they decide to bring fish into their home, that's such a good starting point. And you are absolutely right that it's so dependent on species. So, there's over 33,000 different species of fish. What? And that's over 60% of, like, all the known vertebrate species on Earth. So of course, not all of those species are kept in captivity or, available at like a pet store, as they shouldn't be. But even just in a pet store, if you walk in, you'll see tetras, you'll see cichlids, you'll see catfish and goldfish and bettas and all of these different species that have radically different care requirements. So the really big thing is to decide on the species that you're excited to bring home and go from there. So for example, like a betta, the best environment for them, they're actually tropical fish. So the idea that a betta can live in a bowl is horribly, horribly wrong. And really no fish should ever live in a bowl. Bettas are sold as the ones who can because they are very hardy fish, but it's not kind to keep any fish in a bowl. So tropical fish need heaters. They need a filter. They need places to hide and places to explore. So like we do occasionally adopt out fish, and our requirement for a betta is a 5-gallon tank. On the flip side of that, like the other most common fish is like the goldfish. And people think that goldfish can be kept in bowls as well, but the common goldfish that you see at the store, like feeder fish that are for sale for 17 cents, those guys will grow over a foot long and live over 20 years.
Wow.
And it's like kind of remarkable that they'll do that. And they're fascinating fish. But then, what do you keep a 12-inch long fish in? It certainly can't be a bowl. And so those guys need like at least 75 gallons or more. And so it's so critical to really research the species and think very critically, because you will definitely see websites that say that 2 gallons for a betta is fine, or 1 gallon, or that a goldfish will do fine in 20 gallons and things like that. And it's important to really think critically about it and decide like, okay, can they survive, or are they actually going to thrive in this environment?
Right.
Yeah,
and that's so important.
Distinction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I was so taken with the video that you did was that not only were you talking about their needs as far as the tank that they're in and the heaters and whatever else they need for their physical well-being, but you talked about their environmental enrichment as well. And so can you speak a little bit on that? Like, how do you provide the fish with environmental enrichment? How do we stimulate them that way?
Yeah, it's another thing that, kind of varies a little bit by species, but really what we aim for is for our tanks and environments to be as close to what their natural environment might look like as possible. So we aim for live plants or fabric plants that are soft and in natural colors and things like that. Bettas can be very stressed by bright colors. That's why, they get kind of aggressive with other bettas. And so having very bright colors, I feel like probably isn't the best for them, but like greens and browns and natural colors that you see in aquatic plants is nice for them. Bettas in particular like to hide on and sit on plants. So if you provide them with plants with like broad leaves, you'll totally walk in and find your betta sitting on top of their plant, and it's adorable. They want to hang out there.
That is so cute.
It's really, really cute. And then there's other species like bottom feeders who really get a lot of enrichment by sifting through the sand of the tank and looking for food. And so knowing like what the natural behaviors of the fish are can really help with that kind of enrichment. Because what we think is a beautiful tank may or may not be ideal for the specific species. So it kind of just comes back down to that species specific question.
Right. When we had Swimmy, we did, we did everything we were supposed to do. We got him the bigger tank and the heater and everything, but he seemed to like to be, we put him in one location in the house, but he seemed to like being in a location where he could see me or see us. And I'm wondering if that is that part of environmental enrichment for some fish, for them to sort of see or watch us as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge part of it. In the wild, most of the fish that we keep in tanks would have a much larger environment than they currently have. So like we set a 5-gallon minimum for bettas, but I've read that in the wild, a betta might have like 27 cubic feet that they inhabit. So, like a 3 by 3 by 3 foot square or cube kind of area like that. And that's far larger than 5 gallons. So anything that we can do to add to their enrichment and kind of make up for the fact that they are living in captivity in an area that's, a fish doesn't just naturally live in a house. So yeah, our fish definitely react very strongly when I'm in the room. They'll watch me, they'll watch our dogs, they'll watch my partner. And they really like to see what's going on and be engaged in it. And it's very interesting and exciting to see them kind of engage with everything happening outside the tank.
I saw in the video that you take, maybe you can explain this to the audience. You were using a dry eraser to write on the outside of the tank. Was that is that part of the enrichment for the fish?
It is, yeah. So we have the bettas in particular are pretty curious, and they do enjoy, like when I walk up to the tanks, they're there and they're dancing around and they're all excited to see me. And so something we started doing is taking those dry erase markers and like drawing little things or writing something on the tank or something like that. And a lot of the fish really like to follow the marker as you're writing.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to ever stress them out or anything like that. And, of course, if we noticed signs of stress, we would stop.
Yeah.
But the fish who we do it with consistently, who seem to kind of get the most out of it, like some kind of don't care and others do, they're all individuals. And so when we do write on there, they seem to be very curious about it. And you can watch them, like they'll swim away and then they'll come back and check out what you drew again. And they just continue to be curious about it.
And they were following, one of the fish was following as you were doing it, following the marker.
Yeah, that's
pretty cool.
She's one of our most active little fish. And so she really likes to follow the marker. She really follows me. It's very, very sweet.
So in the moment, people were kind of experimenting with environmental enrichment. What would be signs that the fish is enjoying it and, or, conversely is stressed by it? What would that look like, Gwendolyn?
That's a great question. So there's a number of pretty common stress responses in fish. A big indicator is kind of just general lethargy. So for I keep coming back to bettas because we have the most bettas and I think people see them the most frequently at pet stores. But for bettas, they're very particular about filter flow. And so if the flow of the filter in their tank is too high, some bettas are very stressed by that. And you'll notice that they go and hide more. They aren't as active. Maybe they don't come out to eat as frequently or as readily. And things like that. So hiding and not responding to a person approaching the tank. There are physical signs. There's a thing that fish do called clamping, where they will hold their fins much closer to their body. It's kind of reminiscent of if you imagine someone outside in the cold who is cold and kind of has their arms tight around themselves and you can see visibly that they're cold. It's kind of like that, but in a fish with their fins all tight in and like that. And then some fish will even change colors a bit and show other kind of visual signs of stress. Bettas will develop a thing called stress stripes, which is a horizontal stripe that runs down their body. Other fish species can get vertical stress stripes and things like that. So there are quite a few indicators of stress.
And is it safe to say that, if you're doing something, putting your finger in the top of the tank or using the dry erase marker and they're actively approaching it, they seem playful, that they're kind of present with that stimulus, that can we interpret that as a good thing?
Yes, yeah, I would say so. You'll definitely, fish will always respond differently to different things, but yeah, generally if the fish is coming out and investigating, it's a very good sign that they're curious about it, they're engaged, and they aren't feeling, stressed or afraid.
Right. Because I love that you used on the GeoBeats that they're sentient beings. Mm-hmm. And, that literally defined, it comes from the word, sense in Latin and so forth. So that fish can perceive and respond to sensations, in their environment. So that includes sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, just like us.
Yeah, and they really do, and it's so apparent once you've spent time living with a fish who is receiving proper care. It's so readily apparent that they are sentient and they have their unique experiences. and really that they're very individual and they have particular preferences down to the individual. You know, we can give specific recommendations for certain species, but it's no different than the way that some dogs, like my dog doesn't like to go in the car, but most dogs love to go in the car. You know, every animal is going to have their different preferences.
Right. So there's species preferences, but then there's also the individual as
Absolutely.
in everything. Yeah. Cool. So what is the most common condition that you see? I know you said that bettas were the most common fish, I think, in your sanctuary, but you know, is it fin rot? Is it, you know, swim bladder issues? You know, what are you seeing, Gwendolyn?
It does vary quite a bit. And unfortunately, really the bulk of the things that we see all come from improper care. So one thing we didn't really talk about with proper fish care and environments and things is water quality. And water quality is like far and above the thing to care about if you are keeping fish. You know, you think of like what we might feel like if we spent the day in a room full of smoke.
Right.
A fish living in a tank with poor water quality is going to feel like that all the time. You know, fish waste, just like every other animal's waste, will produce ammonia, and that will start to build up in the water. So an important part of a healthy aquarium is something called the nitrogen cycle, which is something that anyone interested in fish should absolutely read about and understand before they bring home a fish. But the problems that we see with fish who come in are almost entirely from these fish being kept in poor conditions. So like with the bettas, you know, the worst possible environment you could ever keep a betta fish in is a plastic cup on a shelf.
Ugh, that cup.
Yeah, they're horrible. But that's how they're sold. So they're cold. They're living in water that is
not clean.
It's very not clean. We test the water that the fish come home in, and it ranges from okay because they just got a water change to shockingly bad that I'm like surprised the fish is still alive.
Wow.
And so we do see a lot of fin rot because of that, because ammonia and things building up in the water are literally burning the fish's gills and skin and fins and everything. We see a lot of swim bladder issues, which is kind of like so swim bladder issues is like a good way to talk about it, because you see online people will say my fish has swim bladder, which isn't actually a diagnosis. It's kind of like saying I have stomach, like I have an organ.
Yeah.
Swim bladder is just an organ that fish have, but swim bladder issues are presented as buoyancy problems. So a fish floating up at the top of the water is having a buoyancy issue. And for most fish, like especially for bettas, that can very frequently be brought on by stress. So we had a fish who every time I did a water change, he would be floating up at the top of the tank. And I learned after one or two instances of this that was a stress response to the filter running while I was doing a water change. And so turning the filter off during water changes completely stopped his swim bladder issue after water changes. And that's kind of unfortunately the way that a lot of these things are, that like fin rot, most of the time you don't need medication or all that much to quote unquote treat fin rot, because all you have to do is fix the environment. And once the fish is no longer being burned by ammonia or anything like that in the water, they recover on their own, and they can recover quite quickly.
Amazing.
Can we go back a little bit to the swim bladder? Maybe you could talk a little bit about Benjamin, the goldfish, and the negative buoyancy. And I'm not sure if you have negative and positive buoyancy, but the fact that he couldn't, at least that particular fish couldn't float to the top, and how important it is to be able to have buoyancy as a fish.
Yeah, absolutely. So the swim bladder is the organ that lets fish regulate their depth. And it's not just their depth, it's also their stability. So if you see a fish like floating on their side, that's because they're not able to regulate their depth or their stability. And so, yes, there's like positive buoyancy and negative buoyancy. And I assume variations in between as well. And for Benjamin, he had negative buoyancy. And that was, as you mentioned earlier, the x-rays, we found that he actually didn't have that swim bladder organ at all. And so there was no way for him to regulate his buoyancy because he literally just didn't have the organ. So in his case, it's not a stress response or something. It was something, possibly with when he was a baby fish, maybe he didn't get quite enough nutrition. Our vet told us that fishes develop the swim bladder as kind of babies. So it's something in the very early development. So for Benjamin, he, and we've had bettas with negative buoyancy as well, but they had the organ. And so they were able to recover. But with Benjamin, because he didn't have it, it was much more a question of kind of like management and making his life as good as we possibly could while he was with us. And the vet, was very honest and said that she wouldn't be surprised if you weren't around for very long because of that problem. And, unfortunately, that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah. So is the swim bladder dynamic in that fish have the ability to control it, make themselves more or less buoyant by regulating, if you will, their swim bladder? Or is it just a static organ? And then when something goes awry, then they have this positive and negative thing?
That's a really good question that I don't know if I have a super great answer for. As far as I know, well, I do know that it's kind of a regulated thing. So, more air in the swim bladder means that they'll be higher up, less air, and it kind of expands that way. But I don't know that it's like an intentional thing. I think it's kind of a natural thing that happens as they swim up. The swim bladder expands and they, stay stable. And then as they swim down, but honestly, that's just kind of my speculation. I should read more about the specific physiology of fish, because my understanding of their actual physiology on some of those fronts is fairly surface level.
Well, don't minimize what because I was looking at your Instagram last night and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so educational, which I want to give props to. And for the listeners, we will put all of the links and everything on our show notes as we usually do, but it is really, really impactful and full of learning and knowledgeable bits. So I feel like, in a relatively short time, because you said this whole venture that started with Philip was just a little over 2 years ago, right? That you began this whole thing?
Yeah. It's been really not very long, and I've learned a monumental amount in that time. And a huge part of that is from the wonderful aquatic vet who we have as a resource.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean,
yes.
The fact that you were able to X-ray this fish, I might need to talk to that veterinarian. I worked at a hospital that in a large animal hospital in the first part of my career. And I worked in the radiology department, and we X-rayed just about every kind of animal, never a fish. And so it's so fascinating to me that this fish Benjamin was able to get the same level of care that your dog or your cat gets, right? So it was really cool to see that.
And what I want to know is, Benjamin X-rayed underwater, or are they removed from their water environment for the actual X-ray?
They are removed very quickly. So for the X-rays, the veterinarian, Dr. Sanders, she uses a mild sedative. So they're not fully asleep, but they are much calmer. And it's really pretty amazing to watch her do this process. So she has a mobile practice called Aquatic Veterinary Services. And so she comes to us, which is fabulous because transporting fish is quite stressful. And so she comes to us, and then she'll come in and she will examine the fish in their tanks and then only take them out if she absolutely needs to. So that's wonderful. So for Benjamin's X-ray, she had Benjamin in a little container. She measured out the sedative to get him nice and calm, and then had this mobile X-ray set up outside. And she said Benjamin was the second smallest fish she had ever X-rayed. So that was very cute.
So cute.
And it was like all done so quickly, because of course, once a fish is out of water, the priority is to get them back into water.
Yeah.
So she was able to to get the X-rays of his side. She balanced him on a little bottle cap. on her
Oh.
X-ray setup because he was too small for the other thing that she normally uses for larger
Benjamin.
fish. So she balanced him on the bottle cap and then took the X-ray very quickly and then had him back in the water all within, I want to say, like 15 seconds. Like very.
Oh my gosh.
It's fast. Yeah. Once you have your technique and everything, Chris, you snap and that's it. You're probably back in the bowl. But
So
boy, the skill level, the set of skills that you need to have to do that though with a fish is really amazing.
and not drop them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I would be so stressed.
And I want to ask this too, like the sedative part, like, was it an injection?
No, it's put into the water.
Oh, okay.
So they just kind of breathe it in through the water. And apparently it's quite hard to do that with fish like bettas because they have a different organ called a labyrinth organ that actually lets them breathe air from the surface.
They may not get sedated. It might take quite some time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's that same organ that lets people, well, not people, but I guess like, the pet industry with the large chain stores and the bowls and all of that that's kind of where that myth comes from, is that bettas can live in bowls because they have this organ that lets them breathe from the surface and means that they don't need a filter.
Oh, jeez.
But that's not the case. Yeah.
That's just not the case at all.
Yeah,
they absolutely need a filter.
Before we move on, I just wanted to share a story of a mutual friend of Kathy and mine. I was visiting her home. She had a variety of goldfish in a beautiful garden setting with rocks and running water, a waterfall, filters. And one of her fish got the swim bladder, if you will, the swim bladder issue. Like you said, they all have them. But again, the fish had been fine. Something happened, to just this one fish out of, the plethora that she had, but she could not find anybody to help her with this issue,
right.
So the fact that you have this traveling vet, I think you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, is just remarkable. And let's put a plea out there for vets that specialize in fish and reptiles and all of these kind of less thought of, the non-mammals, if you will, because they all need expert veterinary care. And
Absolutely.
it's very distressful for my friend.
Yeah, and your fish is, I love my veterinarian very much and she's fantastic, but it's not her skill set and that would not be, necessarily the appropriate place to bring the fish. So having somebody at your disposal like that, an aquatic vet, somebody who specializes in fish, really important.
It absolutely is. And honestly, like I feel so incredibly lucky to live in the area that this practice serves. So they travel all over California. Dr. Sanders is also licensed in Nevada. And it's just wonderful. I feel so incredibly lucky to have access to her. And I think that if we lived somewhere else and didn't have access to an aquatic veterinarian, I would certainly be, I don't know if I would totally rethink, but I would be much more cautious about doing something like this, of rescuing fish and encouraging people to adopt them because, it's our responsibility as caregivers for animals to provide the veterinary care that they deserve. And if you don't have access to that because there literally isn't an aquatic vet in your area, that makes it that much harder to try to give them the care that they deserve.
That's a good point. Can we go back a little bit about the fish and how they have they can, they see, they smell, they hear, they touch. Because I'm always interested in, I'm going to say, the emotional lives of animals. And I know that we can't speak for the fish. We don't really know exactly what they feel emotionally, but I'm wondering, how do they express themselves? Do you think that they do have some rudimentary emotion? So excited, angry, something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I know for sure that they have quite a range of emotions, really.
Right.
Like they express emotion very, very clearly, especially the intenser, I don't know, more intense, the more intense ones like excitement in particular is so incredibly apparent because our fish, they're able to recognize their caregivers and who's taking care of them and feeding them and things like that. And so when I specifically walk up to the aquariums, the fish are very excited. The bettas will be up at the front of the glass doing these adorable little like wiggles because they know that it's me and I'm coming to feed them. And it's very apparent when they're excited about something.
Yeah.
In the same strain, they really show a lot of curiosity. Every time a new thing is added to a tank, you'll see all of the fish, whether it's a tank with a single betta or a community tank or anything, all of the fish will make their way over to the new thing and they'll check it out. You'll see fish swimming through it, looking at it, maybe like seeing if they can get underneath it and all sorts of different things like that. They're very curious little animals.
Yeah.
And of course, we talked about stress responses and things like that. And it's very apparent as well when a fish is stressed or unhappy or very bored, things like that. Especially as you spend more time with them, you can really start to see their emotions and their personality really coming out.
I think that's one of the big myths that you're trying to dispel. Is that fish are boring, that they're inactive. But that's just, there's a lot of misinformation out there because again, they're not given maybe the best environment to display the huge spirits and personalities that they may have.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the same way that, people really encourage someone who's interested in adopting a dog to, if you go to the shelter, meet the dog out of the pen. Like don't try to judge a dog by the way that they respond to you when they're in a kennel at a shelter.
Good point.
It's that same kind of thing. When an animal is in a super stressful environment, like a fish bowl, where like a fish in a bowl, they're cold, they're bored, they're probably being actively burned by the ammonia and things that have accumulated in the water. That's an incredibly, incredibly stressful environment for them. And so none of their natural personality or behaviors are going to show because all you're seeing is a stress response. And so when they have that chance to not be stressed out, and they can relax and they're warm and their water is clean and they have places to hide and they have a choice of whether or not to interact with you, they're suddenly incredibly personable and very curious and interesting little animals to interact with.
Do you find that I know you said that the fish recognize you, like as you approach the tank and things. Do you think they actually bond with their people, with their caregivers?
I think that they can. Yeah. I know that like the fish recognize me as a distinct person different from like my partner or my family or people who come over. And they're noticeably more excited to see me than they are to see visitors because they know that I'm the one who's coming to feed them.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know specifically how deeply they bond, but I do know that there are many examples of fishes who have created bonds with people, especially like out in the ocean. There are a lot of instances of divers who go back and they visit a fish and the fish will come out to see them because they know that it's that one person. And I think I'm certain that they bond in a different way with people and with fish and all other, the same way that all animals do. But I do think that they'll bond with people and they'll bond with each other.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask, like bonding with each other. Kathy, you can speak to this, but I know a lot of birds in particular have like mates for life and that sort of thing. Is that similar in the fish world? Are there certain species that, have like lifelong mates, or do you see them, in the group environment? Are there certain, what fish that hang out together more so? Does it seem to be within the same species, or do they cross species bond?
It really varies. They absolutely will bond with other fish. It's certainly kind of an individual thing and a bit more species specific. So most, not all, but many bettas are quite solitary and will be stressed out in a community environment. On the flip side, there's many bettas who will do fabulously well in a community environment with appropriate fish. They should, of course, never be kept with another betta, but they can be kept with other community fish. Goldfish are incredibly social fish. It's like recommended to never keep a goldfish alone because they really benefit from having other goldfish. So like an example of that is that we have a couple of Blackmore goldfish, which are a variety of fancy goldfish. And sadly, our largest one passed away. But when she arrived, that her name was Pugsley, and when she arrived with this other fish Wednesday, two Blackmores who came in together, they were very bonded. And so unfortunately, they arrived in water that was really pretty bad. It was the water quality was really very poor. And so they were pretty stressed out. And so we acclimated them very slowly to the new tank and to clean water. And when they had settled into their new tank, Pugsley, the larger fish, was doing fabulous. She was very happy. She was swimming around a whole lot. But over the next couple of days, it was very clear that Wednesday was not feeling well. She was sitting at the bottom of the tank. Her fins were kind of down. She just generally seemed fairly stressed still. And for the next week, as Wednesday was slowly starting to feel better, Pugsley would not leave her side.
Oh.
She was always sitting there with her. You'd see Pugsley just very gently bump up against Wednesday and kind of was very obviously intentionally sitting with the other fish. Because, they were in a larger tank. They had plenty of space to go do their own things if they wanted to. And Pugsley very obviously chose to sit with her and be there as kind of her companion to say, I'm sorry, I'm here to help you feel better. Or I don't know what she was actually thinking, but she was there and chose to do that. And that's really something pretty common to see in some of these more social species of fish, is that they do have their families and their friends that they stick with and want to be with. And it's remarkable to see.
Wow. So once you have rehabbed some of these fish, do they actually get adopted out then, Gwendolyn, or?
Yes, sometimes.
We'll adopt them. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have adopted a number of Bettas out. And I keep a pretty strict rule on incoming fishes that we won't ever take in a fish if we aren't confident that we can keep them for their entire life. I think that's just a good general rule, especially while we're fairly small and, people aren't exactly lining up to adopt fish. Maybe they will in the future, but not quite yet. So we can be very, very particular about the homes that we adopt fish out to. So.
And I assume this is local. I mean, you can't adopt a fish out to somebody that's, I would think, beyond a certain distance.
It is local. I know that shipping fish is really quite common, actually.
Oh.
But we don't do that.
Sounds stressful. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All of our fish have already been through so much before coming here that even if it's just an overnight thing, it just sounds like a bit too much, in my opinion, to put them through. I know that it can be done safely and is frequently done safely, but it's just not a thing that we want to do.
Right.
So are there other fish rescues in the United States, or are you the only one?
There are a number of fish rescues.
What?
Yeah, so there's a big one is the Ohio Fish Rescue.
Wow.
And they kind of specialize particularly in very large fish. Mm-hmm. So a huge problem in the fish keeping world, if you will, is the sale of what some people call monster fish, which is fish species who will grow huge, just way too big for a home aquarium. So some places sell channel catfish, which can reach over 3 feet long.
Oh my God. What?
You can buy a pacu, which is a relative of the piranha and gets over 18 inches long. There are arowanas, which get enormous. So there's a number of species. You can go to a chain pet store today and buy an Oscar cichlid for $10, and that fish is going to get over 12 inches long and need a 100-gallon tank all to themselves because they're quite aggressive fish. So as you can imagine, it's a pretty big problem that people are excited for a fish. They go to the store and then purchase the fish that visually appeals to them, and then are not given enough information about what they're actually getting into.
Right.
It's the way that you can also go to the store and buy like a sulcata tortoise. I know you guys just did that episode with the
We
tortoise.
just did an episode with our friend Ethel. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. I was like, oh my gosh, someone who planned for the size of a sulcata tortoise. That's so fabulous. But it's the same thing, that there are many, many species of fish that get absolutely enormous. And we don't accept a lot of species of fish because they get enormous, and we don't have the space and resources for those species. So the Ohio Fish Rescue they'll take those, they call them like the monster fish, so it's referring to the size.
Yeah.
And then there's a number of like smaller kind of independent rescues, sort of like what we're doing. And a number of them focus specifically on bettas. So Bubbles Betta Rescue is another fabulous rescue in kind of I believe they're in like the Sacramento Davis area of California. And then there's quite a few on Facebook. And then there's a lot of like Facebook groups dedicated to Betta rescue and adoption.
I was reading on your Instagram, somebody was asking because they wanted to rescue some fish. I think it was in Maryland. And you said that you didn't know of any, sanctuaries or rescues in that area, but to kind of peruse Craigslist and offer up because people are often trying to maybe rehome or get rid of their fish when they can no longer care for them or what, I'm sure there are a variety of circumstances, but, typically we would say, like for dogs and cats, don't post on Craigslist and don't, buy a pet off Craigslist. But is this an exception because, the other alternative is not a good one if they can't rehome them?
Yeah. So if you're trying to rehome a fish, I would start with some of those Facebook groups before trying something like Craigslist. Like if you have a fish who you want to rehome.
Yeah.
Just because, I feel like with Facebook groups and things, you have moderators, there's a little bit more of like the personal interaction of that it's somebody's Facebook profile that you're contacting instead of just like a Craigslist ad. But for people who are looking to adopt a fish, to add a fish to their family, Craigslist and OfferUp can be a really, really good way to find fish who need help. We've gotten quite a few of our bettas from Craigslist ads where it's like, it's really common for someone to kind of impulse buy a fish, especially like a betta, because you go into the store and there's these beautiful fish in these cups. And then there's a bowl for sale right next to them that's $30. And then $50 later, you have your betta.
Yeah.
And you think you think you have an appropriate environment because that's what the store has told you. And then you get them home and realize that it's actually a lot more work and the fish isn't doing very well. And it can be a very sad situation. So if you are excited to adopt a betta, that can be a really good way to find one, because a lot of those people that maybe they don't want to take the fish back to the store, but they're hoping to find someone else who is ready to take care of the fish. So we've brought in quite a few bettas who are listed on Craigslist, like for free or for $5 with their tank or something like that. And the people are almost always very thrilled to hear that we have a little rescue and that we're bringing their fish into a place that's ready for the fish and excited for the fish and knows how to give them proper care.
I just want to, have you been self-taught then, because you were talking about, how this kind of all started and so is it just your own research and working with the vet that you mentioned and so forth that you learn your vast amount of knowledge about the various fish species?
Yeah, it really is.
That's impressive.
A lot of time online.
Yeah.
And really with that, like I mentioned earlier, that just very kind of critical mindset. Like anything I read online, I need to have it verified by a couple of different sources online before I'm like, okay, I believe this. Because you will find sites that look very legitimate, like they know what they're talking about, that are just suggesting horrible, horrible care recommendations. And it's really, really sad. So absolutely thinking critically about all of that is super important.
Yeah. And I just wanted to caution those of you out there that might be thinking, might be inspired by this, this episode of PetAbility and think, I want to start a fish rescue, but you're currently in the process of moving, I hear, and you have like over 20 aquariums and 2 ponds, and that those numbers may not even be legit now, but I mean, this is a big deal.
It is. Yeah. So we do now, we have 30 aquariums. Yeah, it's a big commitment. And even if you aren't moving, the simple maintenance of an aquarium is also nothing to take lightly. With 30 aquariums, I spend a lot of time doing aquarium maintenance. But if you had a single aquarium, it's not a huge time commitment each time you need to do like a water change, but it is a long-term commitment. Like say you had 2 goldfish who can live for 20 something years in a 100-gallon tank. You need to be committed to doing a water change like once a week or once every 10 days on that 100-gallon tank for the next 20 years.
Right. Yeah.
And once you know how to do it, it can be, for a 100-gallon tank, you're probably waiting a long time for it to fill up, but it can be a 30-minute to 1-hour process once a week or every 10 days. But it has to be done because that's where that's what they live in. That's what they're breathing. That's
their house.
World.
Yeah.
Like you said, definitely a commitment. And, and speaking of the commitment too, I remember when I moved out to the Boston area, I thought, fish, that would be a good first pet to have because I didn't have a dog at the time. I was living, like up 42 stairs in this loft. I'm like, okay, I'll, get some fish. And fortunately, again, I went to the big box store to check it out, but I talked to a fairly knowledgeable salesperson, and they're like, okay, you need this, you need that, you need this, you need that, you got to do. And I'm like, okay, thank you. And I left because it was too much.
Smart.
Yeah. I thought it would be a much simpler thing. I mean, there's a huge financial investment to do it right.
Yes.
And then again, the time commitment. It's not just like this passive, thing where you plunk them in a tank and, there they go and you just watch them. I mean, there is definitely a commitment as there is with every other pet. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Well, I'm so glad that you are committed to these little guys, Gwendolyn. And I know we're getting ready to wrap up here. So I'm hoping that you could just leave our audience with something, is there something that our audience should know or something they should consider when they're thinking about adding a fish to their family?
I think that the big thing that we really try to emphasize, people talk about adopt, don't shop, and that kind of mentality and approach to adding like a cat or dog to your family. And I just really want to emphasize that option is available for every animal. You might not get the immediate satisfaction of going to the store and leaving with the fish that day, but you can get the satisfaction of knowing that you're helping a fish who needs a home and who, might not end up in such a great situation otherwise.
Right.
Additionally, if you're spending some time looking for a fish, you also then have plenty of time to research what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Really learning about the proper environment and about water quality and the nitrogen cycle is absolutely fundamentally critical to keeping a fish in a way that is compassionate and humane for them and to keep them healthy and happy through their life.
And what a great example for, parents to give their children to, and the adopt, don't shop, and the research and the commitment that is required, because those are lessons that our young people will take with them, hopefully for their lifetime as well.
Of course. Yeah. And to let kids see that fish aren't just decorations. They're not objects. They are sentient animals who have experiences in their own lives. And if we can emphasize that to as many people as possible, I think that's only ever going to be a good thing.
Right. Gwendolyn, can you tell our audience where they can find you if they want to look at your Instagram or if they want to find the Friends of Philip's Fish Sanctuary? Where can they find you? Yeah,
so we are Friends of Philip Fish Sanctuary. It's kind of a long name. On Instagram, it's Friends of Philip _Fish Sanctuary. Philip has 1 L. And then on Facebook, it's Friends of Philip. But if you type in Friends of Philip Fish Sanctuary, that will also come up.
And then on the GeoBeats Animals, it's a YouTube
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that video is on YouTube. They're on Facebook and Instagram as well, but YouTube is their main.
I'm gonna have to follow them.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
We'll put all that up in the show notes for everyone too, in the GeoBeat as well. Okay.
Yes,
Awesome.
we will. And
Right.
just one last question. A while back, we interviewed this wonderful woman who had a vast knowledge of chickens, and she loved to be called, the chicken lady. Can we call you the fish lady as a term of
From now
endearment?
on.
I would be thrilled if you called me that.
Yay, Gwendolyn Church, the fish lady.
The fish lady. Fish are our friends.
And yeah, they're absolutely our friends, and I have embraced fish ladydom. So I
Awesome.
think that's wonderful.
Well,
and one other real quick
Yeah.
resource that I would love to throw out to people too. There is an organization called the American Association of Fish Veterinarians.
Oh,
And they have a locator tool on their website, which is fishvets.org. They have a locator tool that will let you search in whatever area, I think it's the United States, that you're looking to find a fish vet, and you can find a certified aquatic veterinarian. And so that's a great resource to see if there's an aquatic vet in your area.
Awesome.
thanks. That's an awesome resource. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll include that as well. Thanks so much.
Okay. Well, I learned a lot about fish today.
I know. I love it. I love it.
Chris, my head is swimming.
Good one, Kathy.
Gwendolyn, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk with you. And we hope to get to maybe talk to you again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Okay.
Give all the fishies my love.
Yeah.
I will.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our show. Follow us on Facebook or on Instagram at PetAbility Podcast.
For more information about Kathy's books and living with blind dogs, please go to enableyourpet.com. Thank you, and please tune in next time.